Okay, so this is a little introduction to UV mapping. UV mapping on objects is basically the latitude and longitude of a map on, say, the globe. And I've just done a quick Google search here and world projection maps. And you can see there's lots of different ways based on the projection type that cartographers use that the Earth ends up looking like. So you can see these stretched out views down here. Some, people talk about the bias of some of these, favoring the northern hemisphere. One thing that usually happens in almost all the maps is you'll see Antarctica becomes one long sliver, but the reality is that Antarctica is something more like this down at the bottom. So you're always going to have, on a three-dimensional surface, some discrepancy whenever you use a mapping type. Okay, you're going to have more seams, or you're going to have fewer seams, but you're going to have more distortion. So there's no way around that. You just have to choose the best one for what you're trying to do. All right, so let's look at these. We're going to go up to Window. Where is that? Window, UV editor, texture editor. And if I click on any of these objects, let me resize this here. Right? So if I click on any of these objects, and I use the same navigation to zoom in and out of the UV texture editor, if I click on any of these, as a default, I just created a sphere, a cube, and a cylinder. They all have their own layouts. Okay, so this is just the way Maya interprets this and gives you a map for what you have. And we'll talk more about some of this in the panel here. So to make this easier, what I'm going to do, well, first of all, to be able to figure out when you're working with UVs, it's a good idea to have some kind of texture so you can see where distortion might be happening or something like that. You can use a checker texture, which is fine, kind of default procedural one, or you can go and find kind of a UV texture grid. I already have done that and placed it in Scholar for you to check out. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the Hypershade, and I'm going to hit spacebar to maximize this window. And I'm just going to go to Materials, and I'm going to show you how to do this through the material, Maya material, or the MIA material X. Right? And to use this, I need to change the well, not really to use it, but I'm going to go ahead and change this to mental ray, so if I do want to render, my texture will work. So I'm going to double click on the texture, and let's name it my material 1, something like that. And then we're going to go ahead and make a connection with the texture. So if I just click on the color here for the diffuse channel, if I click on the color, I can go ahead and choose any of these if I want, right? So I'll get out of that. So if I want to make a connection to any of these, you can see this little black and white checkerboard, which again is kind of like a, the checker texture that people sometimes use to check UV. So we're going to go ahead and just click on this, and it's going to bring up a whole list of connections that we can make. There's the checker texture, there's cloth, mountain, all these are kind of procedural mathematical textures that don't require a Photoshop file, a JPEG or something like that. So we're going to use a JPEG. So I'm going to click on File, and it creates a node. We'll look at that in a second, and you can see in that File node, it's asked for an image name, so we're going to click on the folder, and we're going to go find it. And I've already saved this into my project, into the source images. So there's my UV layout grid, and I just found this online. There's other ones that you can find if you don't like those colors. So let's go ahead and say open that, and I'm going to hit spacebar to minimize here. And so I have this selected, and down below in the little work area, I'm going to click on the input-output connections, okay, so that it graphs this network. And I'm going to hit spacebar so we can see this. So this is a material, a commons kind of setup for a material where we have the shader group, which is something you'll probably never have to deal with. We have the material, which is that MIA material that we've used before. We now have a texture file, a PNG file actually in this case, and then we have a node that tells it how to place that texture on the object. So as a default, it's just going to use the UVs, but we could tell it to repeat or change the direction. So we'll come back to that in a second. Let's just go and select all three of these objects. And I'm going to middle mouse button and drag and drop the material on there. I'm going to hit 6 on my keyboard. I guess I have to do those individually. All right. So you can see that I have that image now projected onto the surface based on its own UVs. So you can see the UV structure here. The cube fit pretty well. Now the texture file that we were looking at, these are square. So we want, if we don't want any distortion, we want to make sure these are square as well. And you can see that we already have an issue with this one right here, right? Because it's stretching itself out. So let's go to the UV texture editor. And so that we can do this together, I'm going to go to the panels and layout. And I just clicked on the perspective and outliner view. I'm going to go up to panels and let's see, where is that? Panels, panel, and I'm going to choose the UV texture editor, right? All right, so let's look at how we can shape this so that we get this texture to look right. I'm going to right click and say UVs, and I'm just going to select a little bit of those because it's kind of hard to select all of that there. What I want to do is select the whole entire shell, right? So let's go over that again. So what I did is in fact, let's try it without. If I just click on it, yeah, it will work that way too. So without anything selected up in this UV editor, there's a little button right here that if you hover over it, it will give you a little hint, move UV shell tool, okay? I don't even know where that is in the normal setup. Select, you can do select shell, so that would be another way to do it, but I'm just going to use the move UV shell, and I'm going to click on this. And so I can move it, and I can also scale it. So let's go back here, and as you can see, if I just move it, you can see the texture moves across the surface. It does not change the object at all. It just changes where those pixels end up on those polygons in this UV space, not the 3D space. UV space, 3D space. All right, so let's go ahead and just use the scale tool and scale this up a little bit until I get this to look reasonably square. Okay, there are other projections and things that we could do, but let's just go ahead and just so you can see how to do this manually. Is that pretty good? Yeah. And I'm going to scale it down a little bit so it fits. Oops, scale this uniformly. All right, something like that. Okay, if that texture is a little hard to view your UVs while you're working on that, you can gray it out, clicking this button here, or you can hide the image, toggling it on and off. These icons are so small, but you just have to get used to using those, right? All right, so let's turn that image back on. All right, so that's how you set up those three objects just like that. These already have UVs, so I think in the next tutorial, part 2 of this, I'll create an object that isn't just a default cube, and we'll look at how to create the UVs for it. All right.